On April 30th, 1945, the war in Europe was already lost. Berlin was surrounded. The Red Army was less than 500 meters from the Reich Chancellery. Artillery shook the ground day and night, and inside a concrete bunker beneath the city, Adolf Hitler disappeared. Officially, the story is simple. Unofficially, nothing about it is. The official version, according to Soviet and later Western reports, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. He allegedly shot himself while Eva Braun on cyanide. Their bodies were burned in the garden of the Chancellery, partially destroyed, and later recovered by Soviet forces. Case closed. Except it never was. The first problem: no complete body of Adolf Hitler was ever publicly shown. No photographs. No independent autopsy. No confirmed remains presented to the world. The Soviet Union claimed to have fragments, then denied it, then changed its version multiple times. Stalin himself told Allied leaders in 1945 that Hitler might have escaped. Why would he say that? The bunker was chaos in the final days. The Führerbunker was not a controlled environment. It was overcrowded, poorly lit, filled with wounded soldiers, secretaries, guards, and civilians. Orders contradicted each other. People moved constantly. Documents were burned in panic. Eyewitness accounts conflict sharply. Some heard a gunshot. Some did not. Some saw bodies. Some never did. Even those closest to Hitler gave statements that changed over time. The teeth, the strongest evidence used to confirm Hitler's death, is dental. Soviet forces claimed they recovered jaw fragments and dentures. Years later, these were matched to Hitler's dentist's assistant. But here is what raises questions. The dentist himself was dead. The assistant was interrogated under Soviet custody. No independent Western forensic team examined the remains. The fragments were kept secret for decades. And in 2017, French researchers were allowed to examine a skull fragment long believed to be Hitler's. It belonged to a woman. Why burn the bodies at all? Hitler had explicitly ordered that his body should not be captured or displayed like Mussolini's. Fair enough. But the method described raises doubts. Gasoline was scarce in Berlin. The shelling was constant. The garden was exposed. Yet witnesses claimed a complete cremation occurred in minutes. Experienced soldiers later questioned whether such burning was even possible under those conditions. The Soviet silence if Hitler was truly dead beyond doubt. Why did the Soviets hide the evidence? Why classify reports? Why contradict themselves? Why spread rumors deliberately? For years, Soviet intelligence files on Hitler's fate were sealed tighter than nuclear secrets. Stalin encouraged uncertainty. Uncertainty creates leverage. The escape routes Berlin in April 1945 was collapsing. But it was not sealed. Underground tunnels, sewers, subway lines, emergency airstrips. Multiple aircraft left Berlin in the final days. Submarines continued operating after Hitler's supposed death. Nazi officials vanished across Europe and South America. If many escaped, why assume the most important man could not? Eyewitnesses who later retracted. Several bunker witnesses later admitted they never saw Hitler's body clearly. Others claimed they were pressured into statements. Some said they repeated what they were told, not what they saw. One guard famously said, "I saw what I was supposed to see." The questions that refused to die. Why was there no public confirmation? Why did Stalin say Hitler escaped? Why did the skull fragment belong to a woman? Why did intelligence agencies continue tracking Hitler for years after 1945? Why were sightings investigatively in South America? And why, decades later, do files still remain classified? This story is not about conspiracy. It is about uncertainty. About what happens when history is written in smoke, rubble, and political silence. And about a moment where the world wanted closure, but never truly received it. Part 2. The last people who saw him alive. If Adolf Hitler died on April 30th, 1945, then one question matters more than all others. Who saw him alive last? Not who repeated the story. Not who heard about it later. but who stood in the bunker face to face with him in the final hours. Because when we trace those people, the certainty begins to crack. The bunker was not a tomb. It was a crossing point by late April. The Führerbunker was no longer a command center. It was a transit space. People arrived. People left. Some were sent out on missions that made no sense. Others vanished without explanation. Maps were destroyed. Files burned. Orders whispered, not written. This matters because history treats the bunker as sealed. It was not. Hitler's inner circle was shrinking in the final days. Only a handful of people were consistently near Hitler. Martin Bormann, Joseph Goebbels, Eva Braun, Otto Gunsche, Heinz Linge, a few secretaries, everyone else rotated in and out. And here is the first problem. None of these people gave identical testimonies. Not in 1945. Not in later years. Not even to each other. Otto Gunsche, the man assigned to destroy the body, Otto Gunsche, was Hitler's personal adjutant. According to the official story, Hitler personally ordered Gunsche to burn his body after death. Gunsche later claimed he heard a gunshot. He entered the room. He saw Hitler dead. He helped carry the bodies. He supervised the burning, but when interrogated by the Soviets, his statements changed multiple times. Sometimes the gunshot was loud. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes Eva Braun was lying beside Hitler. Sometimes not. Under Soviet captivity, testimonies were not neutral. They were extracted. Heinz Linge. The valet who found the body, Linge, was Hitler's personal servant for years. He claimed he entered the room shortly after the suicide and saw Hitler slumped on the sofa. But later, he admitted something critical. He did not check for a pulse. He did not examine the wound closely. He did not verify death medically. He saw a body and assumed. The door that no one can describe the same way witnesses described the suicide room differently. Some said the door was locked. Others said it was unlocked. Some said it was opened immediately. Others said minutes passed. These details matter. Because in real suicide scenes, details align. Here, they do not. Eva Braun, present or not, some testimonies insist Eva Braun died beside Hitler. Others claim she died earlier. Others say later. Some say she was seated. Others say lying. Even her position is uncertain. Yet we are told this was a controlled, planned final act. Nothing about the testimonies feels controlled. Martin Bormann. The man who knew too much. Bormann is crucial. He controlled access. He controlled documents. He controlled exits. He was also officially declared dead years later, but his body was not identified until decades after the war. And here is the strange part. Multiple witnesses claimed Bormann was still alive after Hitler's supposed suicide. Why would Hitler die while the man controlling everything continued moving? Unless the story was still unfolding. The burning. The most questioned moment according to witnesses, Hitler's body was burned outside the bunker, under artillery fire, under rain, with limited fuel. Military experts later stated, complete cremation was impossible. Identification would be extremely difficult. The remains would be fragmentary at best, which raises the question. If identification was impossible, how was certainty achieved? The Soviets arrive. And everything goes silent when Soviet troops entered the area. They found chaos. Bodies everywhere. Burned remains. Mass graves. They recovered fragments and claimed they belonged to Hitler. But then something strange happened. They did not announce it. They did not show it. They classified it. For years. And Stalin told his allies, Hitler may have escaped. This was not a rumor. It was a deliberate statement. Eyewitnesses under pressure. Many bunker witnesses later admitted something unsettling. They were told what the story was before they gave testimony. Some repeated it. Some adjusted it. Some stayed silent. History often relies on witness consistency. Here, consistency was manufactured. The last confirmed moment, the last moment where Hitler is confirmed alive by multiple sources, is earlier than April 30th. After that, everything becomes second-hand. Assumptions, narratives, statements made under captivity. There is no moment where the world can say, This is the final verified sighting. The question that changes everything if no one can say with certainty. Who saw him die? Who verified the body? Who identified the remains independently? Then the question is no longer, did Hitler escape? The question becomes, why was the world asked to accept uncertainty as closure? This is not a claim. It is a gap created by chaos, secrecy, and political convenience. And in history, gaps do not disappear. They wait. Part 3. Why intelligence agencies never closed the file. If Adolf Hitler was unquestionably dead in 1945, then one would expect simple outcome. The file would close. The search would end. The world would move on. That did not happen. Instead, something far more unsettling occurred. The hunt continued, quietly, globally, for years. The first post-war rise within weeks of Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence units received a strange directive: continue monitoring reports related to Adolf Hitler. Not rumors, not propaganda. Official intelligence channels. This instruction alone changes everything. Because intelligence agencies do not waste resources on dead men. Stalin's shadow strategy. Joseph Stalin played a critical role in shaping the uncertainty. In private conversations with Churchill and Truman, Stalin repeatedly stated that Hitler might have escaped. This was not public theater. These were closed-door meetings. Why would Stalin, who controlled Berlin and had access to the bunker, plant doubt? There are 3 possible reasons. 1. He genuinely did not have proof. 2. He had proof but chose to conceal it. 3. He wanted uncertainty to destabilize the post-war order. All 3 are troubling. The Soviet investigation that changed its story. Soviet investigators initially claimed they found no trace of Hitler. Then they claimed they found remains. Then they said those remains were inconclusive. Then they reversed again. Reports were rewritten. Witness statements altered. Entire files reclassified. Even Soviet generals later admitted the investigation was chaotic and politically influenced. Truth was not the priority. Control was. The Americans take the possibility seriously. In the United States, the FBI opened a dedicated section for Hitler sightings. This is not speculation. Declassified FBI files show dozens of reports investigated between 1945 and the early 1950s. Agents followed leads in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Spain. Each report was logged. Each was evaluated. Some were dismissed. Others were not. If this were fantasy, the files would not exist. The CIA and the long silence. The CIA inherited many of these cases. For decades, it refused to comment. Then, years later, selected documents were classified. They revealed something critical. Analysts did not treat Hitler's death as confirmed. They treated it as probable. In intelligence language, probable is not closure. South America, not a random destination. Why South America? Because it had established Nazi networks, sympathetic regimes, remote geography, weak extradition systems. High-ranking Nazis undeniably escaped there. Eichmann, Mengele. This is fact. The infrastructure existed. The question intelligence agencies asked was simple. If many escaped, why assume the most protected man in Europe could not? The sightings that would not go away. Some reports were absurd. Others were disturbingly specific. Men matching Hitler's appearance. German-speaking compounds. Remote estates guarded by former SS members. One report described a man known locally as the old German who avoided photographs and medical records. Another mentioned submarines arriving months after the war. Most were never proven, but they were never fully dismissed either. Why intelligence could not confirm death? Here lies the core issue. No definitive physical proof was shared internationally. No skull, no independent autopsy. Only Soviet-controlled fragments and testimonies. In intelligence work, that is not enough. The skull fragment that changed everything decades later. Researchers examined a skull fragment long believed to be Hitler's. It belonged to a woman. This revelation did not prove escape, but it destroyed certainty. And once certainty is gone, intelligence agencies reopen doors. The political cost of saying, "We don't know," publicly admitting uncertainty about Hitler's fate, would have been catastrophic. It would have undermined post-war stability, fueled extremist myths, damaged trust in victory, so a simpler narrative was chosen. The war ended. Justice was served. Even if the evidence was incomplete, why the file stayed open so long? Intelligence agencies work on risk, not comfort. As long as there was even a small chance Hitler survived, they had to consider it. Not because he might return, but because symbols matter. A living Hitler, even hidden, would have been a rallying point. That risk was never ignored. The quiet closure eventually, the investigations slowed, not because proof emerged, but because time passed. Age became the final argument. Files were archived, leads ignored, the probability dropped to near zero. Near zero is still not zero. The question that remains: if history is certain, intelligence does not keep asking. But they did, for years, across continents, with real resources, which leaves us with a final uncomfortable thought. The story we tell publicly may be complete, but the story governments told themselves never was. Part 4. The escape that could have worked. To understand why the question of Hitler's fate never truly died, we must step away from the bunker, away from Berlin, away from April 1945, and look instead at the system that existed around the Nazi leadership long before the final collapse. Because escapes like these are never improvised at the last minute. They are prepared in advance. The myth of total collapse history often presents Germany in April 1945 as completely sealed. No exits, no control, no coordination. This is a myth. Yes, Berlin was surrounded, but the Nazis' system was not only Berlin. It was networks, logistics, foreign assets, safe routes already tested. Many high-ranking Nazis escaped after Hitler's supposed death, not before. That alone forces a reconsideration. Operation networks. Not one plan. There was no single escape plan. There were layers: air evacuation, underground routes, diplomatic cover, maritime extraction. Some were chaotic. Some failed. Some worked. History confirms this. The air route. Risky but real. In the final days of the war, aircraft continued to leave Berlin. This is documented. Small planes, helicopters, courier flights. Hannah Reich, a famous pilot, flew into and out of Berlin under Soviet fire days before Hitler's disappearance. If aircraft could enter, they could leave. Was it likely? No. Was it impossible? Also no. And intelligence agencies took that seriously. The underground city Berlin had one of the most complex underground systems in Europe. Subways, bunkers, emergency tunnels. Some tunnels connected directly to government buildings, others to transport hubs. Soviet troops later admitted they did not fully map or control these systems for weeks. If chaos exists, opportunity exists. The maritime route. The most persistent theory. This is where intelligence interest focused most. German submarines continued operating months after the war officially ended. Some surrendered late, some arrived in Argentina. This is not rumor. It is documented fact. U-530 and U-977 arrived in Argentina months after Germany's surrender. Their crews were interrogated. Nothing was proven. But questions remained. Why such long voyages? Why no combat? Why no logs? South America was not random. Argentina, in particular, offered sympathetic leadership. Existing German communities, remote regions, weak documentation systems. Nazi fugitives settled there openly. Some lived under real names, others under new identities. This infrastructure was real. The idea that only minor figures used it is historically false. The rat lines, confirmed and documented after the war, Catholic clergy, intelligence services, and underground networks facilitated escapes. These were later called rat lines. They moved people from Europe to South America and the Middle East. Eichmann used them. So did many others. These routes existed. They worked. They were efficient. The question intelligence agencies asked was not, did rat lines exist? It was, who used them that we never confirmed? Why Hitler was different. Critics argue Hitler was too recognizable to hide. This assumes modern surveillance. In 1945, there was no facial recognition, no digital records, no global databases. A man who avoided cameras, public appearances, and hospitals could disappear, especially in remote regions, especially if protected. The psychological argument, some argue Hitler would never flee. That's suicide for his character. This is interpretation. History shows leaders often act differently under absolute defeat. Some choose martyrdom, others choose survival. There is no psychological law, only probability. Why no proof emerged if Hitler had escaped? Why no confirmation? Because successful disappearances leave no evidence, no documents, no bodies, no statements, only absence. Intelligence agencies understand this. Historians often do not like it. The most important point: no intelligence agency ever concluded definitively that Hitler escaped, but none concluded definitively that escape was impossible. That gray zone is everything. Why the world accepted closure anyway? Because uncertainty is dangerous. A confirmed dead dictator ends a chapter. A possibly alive one keeps it open. The post-war world needed stability. Certainty was chosen, not necessarily because it was perfect, but because it was necessary. The question that still matters this story is not about proving escape. It is about understanding why even governments never fully ruled it out, why files stayed open, why investigations continued, why silence was preferred over debate. In the next and final part, we will ask the most uncomfortable question of all. What if the truth no longer mattered? What if the story we accepted was chosen not because it was complete, but because it allowed the world to move on? Part 5. Why the truth never be confirmed. At some point, every investigation reaches a limit. Not because answers no longer exist, but because asking the question becomes more disruptive than accepting silence. The question of what truly happened to Adolf Hitler reached that point decades ago. The files that never fully opened. Even today, not all documents related to Hitler's death are public. Some remain classified. Others were released selectively. Many were summarized, not shown in full. Governments rarely say why certain files stay sealed, but history shows a pattern. Files remain closed when they threaten political legitimacy, institutional credibility, international agreements, or long-established narratives. Truth is not the only value states protect. Stability often comes first. Historians are more careful than the internet. Serious historians rarely claim Hitler escaped, but they are also careful with absolute statements. Most use phrases like, most likely, based on available evidence. The consensus view, these phrases matter. They acknowledge probability, not certainty. And probability is not the same as proof. Why the dental evidence is both strong and weak. The dental fragments remain the strongest physical evidence, but they rely on Soviet custody, testimony from interrogated witnesses, no independent verification at the time. In modern forensic standards, this would be questioned, not dismissed. Questioned. That distinction is crucial. Why intelligence agencies let question fade. The investigations did not end with a dramatic conclusion. They ended with diminishing returns. As years passed, sightings decreased, witnesses aged or died, networks collapsed, probability dropped. Eventually, agencies concluded not. He is confirmed dead. But he is no longer a factor. That is not the same thing. The power of a closed story. History prefers endings. Societies need villains to fall. Wars need final moments. Trauma needs closure. A confirmed suicide in a bunker provided that. It allowed Germany to rebuild, Europe to stabilize, the world to move forward. An open-ended mystery would have haunted generations more intensely. So a narrative solidified. not because it was perfect, but because it worked. Why the question still attracts curiosity, this is important. The fascination is not really about Hitler, it is about trust. Do we trust wartime testimonies, victors' records, politically filtered evidence? How often has history later revised what once seemed certain? That doubt is human. What can say with confidence we can say this? There is no verified evidence that Hitler lived a long life after 1945. There is also no publicly presented, independently verified proof shown to the world that removes all doubt. Between those two statements lies uncertainty. Why uncertainty does not equal conspiracy? Questioning evidence does not mean believing escape theories. It means recognizing limits. History is often written under chaos, fear, political pressure. Not every gap is a secret plot. Some are simply never filled. The most honest conclusion, the most honest position is uncomfortable. Adolf Hitler almost certainly died in Berlin, but the exact circumstances, verification, and handling of evidence were messy, politicized, and incomplete. That mess created a shadow, and shadows last. Why this story still matters not because of Hitler, but because it teaches something larger, that even the most documented events can contain uncertainty, that official stories are sometimes simplified, that history is not always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it is a negotiated memory. The final thought, the real question may not be, did Hitler escape? Why do we need the answer to be absolute? Perhaps the world moved on not because the truth was fully known, but because continuing to ask had become more dangerous than accepting what was most likely. And in that silence between certainty and doubt, history chose to close the file.